Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Down to Earth with Harriet Cameron. We got lots to talk about. It's Tuesday, the very first day of October. So one of my favorite months because at the end of this month, what happens? What happens on October 31st? Halloween, where we get to act crazy and I get to feel like a kid again and I get to eat lots of candy. So bring on the candy, people. I will be eating candy this October 31st, and it's Halloween, and the year is winding down. Unfortunately, that's the downside. That's the only downside to this. The only downside to all of this is that the year starts to wind down. And while we may not be exactly happy about it because we may not have gotten everything we wanted done this year, we're still grateful that we're on this side of it. So say shout out to everybody, and especially giving honor to God. I sound like I'm in church. Giving honor to God and thanking God for his mighty miracles and his mighty works and his graciousness that has allowed us all to still be on this side. And while we pray for those who left, we thank God that we're still here, right? Right. So we're grateful for that. It's Tuesday, the very first day of October. And I just want to say happy October. And it's boot season, which I'm personally not happy about. And legging season, I'm not happy either. Why should I be thrilled about having my body encased in all kinds of clothing where you dash from the building to the car so you won't effectively freeze and your eyelashes won't freeze off and your face won't be frozen. Oh, it doesn't sound like fun, but guess what? It is what it is. So whether I like it or not, guess what? I still have to I still have to do this. So whether I like it or not, it's still going to be October regardless. And I guess I guess I guess I have to do this. Oh, sucks to be me, right? Sucks to be me. I'd say so. I'd pretty much say so, right? Right? So today I want to talk about sex tourism, and I know I have a dedicated viewer. Thank you for joining me. Thank you so much for tuning in. I want to talk about sex tourism. It's a subject that's very close to my heart. I was at an event last week, and I promised someone that I would talk about it. And I was at an event, and they came to my attention and asked me if I were aware of what happens in Cambodia and Thailand. And I said, yes, as a matter of fact, this had been brought to my attention about 10 years prior to. And the type of sex trafficking that happens in those areas and whom it affects and so on. And I promised that I would talk about it. I promised that I would certainly delve into it. So in keeping with that, I kind of thought that I would bring to mind some sort of idea on what sex trafficking is, and to sort of give you some idea of why we are concerned about sex tourism. Sex trafficking is one thing. It's the trafficking in sex of people who are being used for sex. So they're exploited. Trafficking is about exploitation, force, and coercion, right? So the entire body of trafficking is modern slavery. And we refer to it as human trafficking because they're trafficking in persons. There's drug trafficking, right? And uh, there's drug trafficking. We know there have been animal trafficking where they've taken people across borders. We also know that they have ripped other countries of their assets, their historical values and assets. So there's also that kind of trafficking. But when it comes to human trafficking is broken down sex trafficking, labor trafficking, which includes domestic servitude, and of course, organ trafficking. And so when you think about trafficking, let me just clear my throat for a bit. When you think about trafficking, it's obvious that trafficking uh, is correlated, is directly tied to tourism. And I'm going to tell you why. So I have a definition for you. So I'm briefly going to tell you what sex tourism is. So there are different parts to sex tourism, right? So sex tourism basically is travel to a different location for the sake of sexual activity, particularly with prostitutes, particularly with sex workers. Now, there is domestic sex tourism where people, for instance, leave one city and or one state and go to another state expressly for the purpose of having sex with people whom they normally wouldn't have sex with, whether they're going to have sex with children or whether they're going to have sex with other vulnerable populations. Right? The World Tourism Organization says that sex tourism are trips organized within the tourist sector with the primary purpose of having commercial sexual relationships with the people at the destination. So sex tourism in a nutshell is travel organized by people to have sex with the people at the destination. Now, uh, there are some places that are really popular for sex tourism. You all know them. I don't need to say them, right? Brazil, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic. Y'all know that. That's why y'all going to the DR. You go there to have sex, right? Amsterdam, Kenya, Colombia, Thailand, Cambodia, Cuba, Indonesia, right? The country is popular for female sex tourism. Southern Europe, Greece, Italy, Cyprus, Spain, Portugal, the Caribbean, of course, led by Jamaica, Barbados, and the Dominican Republic. And other popular destinations include Bulgaria, Tunisia, Lebanon, Morocco, Jordan, Azerbaijan, Fiji, Colombia, and Costa Rica. Lord Jesus, help us. Why are we concerned about this? Well, the most common type of sex tourism is men seeking women. Less common forms including female women seeking men. Hello, somebody. And this is the part, adults seeking children. Sex stories come from developed countries in Europe as well as the United States. Asian countries, including Thailand, the Philippines, Cambodia, and Nepal, are common destinations for sex tourists. Lord Jesus. I don't know how much when I came across it, somebody, I promised someone that I would talk about it. And then I got stuck because I didn't want to. And then it came to my mind yesterday that I should talk about it and that I have to talk about it because of the ramifications and the implications that are involved for vulnerable peoples, especially children. In Cambodia and Thailand, for instance, there are men who travel from the United States and Europe, right? And who travel specifically for the purpose of seeking to have sex with children. Missionaries in Cambodia, there are plenty of people, there are few people of American and Canadian origin who, and some Europeans as well, who have established shelters and facilities to provide relief for these children. So they have the statistics. They can tell you that there are children as young as 8 who have been sexually violated by grown men from Europe and the United States. And that these children, sometimes by the time they live in brothels, by the time they start having periods, they become pregnant, they are forced to have abortions, some of them have children, and so somebody has to care for them. These children are often left behind, right? So they are rarely ever taken care of by the men who have had sex with them, right? They're abandoned. They end up with sexually transmitted diseases that sometimes prove life threatening. They end up with diseases where they can't even have children and they are left to survive in a country that is already economically deprived, right? And so they're sheltered, they're forsaken, they're abandoned. Nobody wants to have anything to do with them. So a few people with good heart take it up on themselves to go over there and start a shelter to provide help because they recognize that somebody has got to do it. That, in a nutshell, is what sex tourism is. Sex tourism is whether you someone travels. Like I was just reading a story about a guy. It just came across my feed about a guy from Ypsilanti, Michigan, who went to Ohio, of all places, took his 4-year-old daughter to Ohio to stay in a motel, and of course he approached a group of young children. So he was using the daughter as a decoy. That's often what they do. They have a small child with them to make it seem like they're friendly, right? To make it seem like they're non-threatening. And he was really just using his daughter as a decoy. So he left his daughter in the hotel room while he walked around looking for willing victims. He apparently identified 3 young girls who were in a hot tub, and he kept following them around the resort. So their parents and everybody else got concerned, and he went and sat with them and said his daughter wasn't feeling well. Could they come and sit with his daughter and play with her? And they said no. So the parents called the police. And when the police came and went to his room, of course, they found that his daughter had been knocked out. He had given her gummy bears laced with melatonin, of course, right? Why am I saying that? Is because he traveled. That's a form of domestic sex tourism. He traveled from Ypsilanti to Ohio. He did not want the folks in Ypsilanti who know him to know that that's what he does, that he has sex with children. So he goes to a resort knowing that there are probably people there, they're family friendly, so there are probably people there who have children looking for willing victims. This is why I say when you're out with your kids, keep an eye on them. If you're not careful, make sure you know where they are at all times. I'm always amazed at how people send their young children in a crowded restaurant to the bathroom by themselves. I never understand that in today's day and age. Or you're at the mall and you tell the child who is 8 or 9 or 10 to go to the bathroom by him or herself or with other young children, and you're just walking around with your friends lolling. I'm amazed at parents who do that. I'm also amazed that when I'm at a hotel and I see young children just running around the hotel unsupervised, where are the parents? I'm like, so you don't care about them? Well, somebody else is going to find something to do with them, right? But in keeping in mind what the parameters and the description of sex tourism is, now you see that we have a problem. The problem we have is not the demand. The problem we have is not the supply, it's the demand. People who are seeking to have sex, right? People to have sex with vulnerable people. So some of you all leave here to go to the Dominican Republic. That's sex tourism. You're going over there because you hear the girls are pretty and they're available and they're young, and you can't do it here because if you do it here, you're going to get caught. So you go over to the Dominican Republic to have sex with young girls. Some people go to have sex with young boys. I've heard some stories, right? So some of you leave here and you may not even reach as far as the Dominican Republic. You may not even reach as far as Colombia or Costa Rica or Gambia or Kenya or Thailand or Cambodia. But you do go to Las Vegas. And you go to Las Vegas so you can go get your groove on. And you're like, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? That's sex tourism. You go there for the expressed purpose of having sex. That's your purpose. So don't say, well, some people are, I gotta get away, I gotta get away, I gotta get away. No, you gotta get to where you can have sex with people whom you can control. Right? And the reason that this is bad is because what we're finding, according to the World Health Organization, is that there's sexually transmitted diseases that are left in the wake of that. There are children, if they have had sex with children, there are children who have had children sometimes. So you have children who are not cared for. And the guy just comes back here and he's like, hey, sorry, sucks to be you, but, I'm me. Okay, and he comes back and he's married and he has a family and he's a respectable businessman. He's a CEO, vice president, or whatever. Because obviously, this is happening amongst people who are what? Affluent and people who can afford to do the travel, right? So this is not your ordinary woes who just, hey man, I just got my tax return, so I'm going to go to the Dominican Republic. These are people who go there once or twice a year because they can afford to. So ladies, check your mans. Check on your mans. Yeah? Check on him. Why is he going away? So why do you go to Cambodia so often? Sometimes they're not even telling you they're going to Cambodia. They go somewhere else and then fly from somewhere else to Cambodia if they think that you're watching. So check on your mans, people. Check on your mans. Ask the question. And a lot of guys are uncomfortable when I talk about stuff like this because you're like, well, somebody has to talk about it, right? Let's talk about gay tourism, for instance, gay sex tourism, right? That is a thing where people leave one country, especially in countries where homosexuality is frowned on or not tolerated. Do you know what happens? Men do what? They leave those countries and they go somewhere else where it is acceptable. A couple of years ago at the Winter Olympics in Russia before 2016, Vladimir Putin said clearly, do not come here to have sex with our children. Don't bring your AIDS here. And he was adamant about it because he knows that gay sex tourism is what? It's a real thing, right? Right? So what is gay sex tourism? Gay sex tourism is just people who go to have sex, and and it's a flourishing market for bisexual and bi-curious tourists, right? They go and explore. Some of them are saying, well, I can't do this at home, so I can do this, right? And here's a popular location: Spain, Sardinia in Spain, Ibiza in Spain, right? Sicily, and Fire Island, where sex tourism is widely possible, right? Can you believe this? For example, in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, gay sex tourism has become a popular niche, hosting a racially diverse market. My God in heaven. Are you believing this stuff? And you thought that Harriet was making this stuff up. Go Google it. Right? Because I was alarmed, right? I was, say, alarmed. I was totally, totally alarmed. I could not believe how much, uh, how much, how much this was going on, right? It's amazing to me. Uh, it's amazing to me how people, right? How people utilize the tools that we have available today, and frankly, as long as the behavior is taking place between consenting adults, that's your business, that's your money, that's your life. It's happening between consenting adults. Don't get children, don't destroy children in it, right? I know of one story where a guy had gone to the Dominican Republic, and this was relayed to me by his friend, and he had gotten a girl there pregnant. He had gotten the young girl there pregnant, and she had the baby. And I said, does she know she can take the baby to the US Embassy and get a US passport for the child and bring the child to the States? And he said, well, that's exactly what he's fearing, because if she knows that, then she could come here to live and ostensibly get child support money and hold him accountable for his carelessness. Do you see what I'm saying? And because people in those societies lack information and lack access to the internet, they lack the means to find out all this information. They really don't know. Some of these children who are born as a result of some sexual tourist activity, if these folks know that the children who emit as a result of that, just go to the US Embassy and provide proof. If you get a copy of his driver's license or whatever and prove and do, and prove that, you get a passport, you take the child to the States, and he will have to pay for it. Maybe that will stem the tide of it. Because you got to ask yourself the question, is it some lure? Is it something? Why do people proliferate in this? Why are people Is it something in our nature where you just want to have sex with different people outside of sex with children? I'm just talking about sex between consenting adults. Do you find that, because some people, we have said, I read a University of Minnesota study that said what transpires in sex trafficking a lot is that men like a little violence in their sexual activity, and they like the outcome. They like to have control over the outcome. So they like the commerce that is involved in it, the exchange of money, because then the exchange of money does what? Gives them the power. Perhaps this is what sex tourism is all about, is the fact that they're paying for it, and in paying for it, because there's still some places in the US where prostitution is illegal, right? And in paying for it, that gives them control over the sexual experience. So they're paying you for an hour. So you got to do exactly what I tell you to do, how I tell you to do it, and what I want. Because here in America, you can't just do anything with people, because you will go to jail for it, or you will pay a price for it somehow. See what I mean? So people are finding ways to explore themselves. Now, in terms of gay sex tourism, that's a whole other animal. That's for people who want to explore whatever, they're bi curious, or if they want to find out, but they don't want to do it here because the ramifications of them doing it here could be detrimental, could prove detrimental to their existence in terms of social, right? Social and civic life and political life. That's primarily what they're concerned about. They don't want anybody to know they're bi-curious or they have explored their gay sexuality. So they keep it away from the mainstream, and where prying eyes could take a photo and upload it to the New York Times. Do you see where I'm coming from? So you have to look at sex tourism as, is it part of pornography? Yes. It's a 32 billion, actually it's now $100 billion a year industry. So of course, yes. And if travel organizers and people who organize travel recognize that there is a market and a complete niche for it, guess what? They're all in and they're making money. So there are tour guides, there are the people on the ground who provide hotels and car rentals and other form of touristy activities, bars and so on. Anybody ever been to South Beach, Miami? South Beach? Anybody? Take a ride, right? Just take a ride. If you're ever in the area, just take a ride down there. You'll see pretty much see what I'm talking about, right? So sex tourism then, is it detrimental? And how detrimental is it? As far as I'm concerned, it's detrimental when explored from the perspective of people, of adults having sex with children. That's really the part of it that I want to focus on, where adults are traveling to another location, let's say here in Detroit, and people are leaving the city of Detroit, leaving the state of Michigan, and going to a whole other state so that they can explore themselves having sex with children. That's the part of it that I am concerned about, because that has serious ramifications for the individual, right? And the ramifications are sexual trauma. A lot of what we're seeing in the world is where, and this has been going on from time immemorial. This is not something new. However, we thought we had arrived point, at a point in human civilization where some things we left behind, some things we thought that happened because people didn't know any better, they didn't have access to good information, and we have overcome some of those sexual urges. But it seems to me that the more we ramp up our civilization, the more we live in a postmodern world, seems to me is the more we cling to some of the issues from the past, such as deviant forms of sex. Anybody who wants to have control over the outcome of the sexual activity, irrespective of how their partner feels, is someone whom I don't think is necessarily someone I want to be near, or you should want to be near, because that means they can introduce activities into it that are perhaps not good for anyone. Like I said, in the University of Minnesota study, one of the things they found was that people who engaged in sex trafficking, and especially people who, and these were not careless people. These were not people who, for want of a better word, didn't have anything better to do. These were people who were married. These were men. particularly men seeking relationships with women, especially. They were married, had a lot to lose, right? They had family, they had wives, they had jobs, careers, they had public and civic profiles. So they had a lot to lose. But what they said was they wanted control over the outcome. So they introduced violence into the activity. So a lot of the girls were beaten up, and especially the younger, the more vulnerable, especially those who came from other countries and who perhaps were undocumented or who were just getting a footing in the society. Those are especially more vulnerable. People who lack economics or lack the upward mobility to go forward, or children who sometimes take on the role of taking care of the family, but instead of going to get a job, they turn to sex. God help us all. I just kind of had to pause there for a minute when it came to that one. I literally, Lord Jesus, take the case. I literally had to feel that one. Lord have mercy. So what I have read in places like Cambodia and Thailand, just bear with me as I struggle through this, because like I said, this was not something that I'm comfortable with, and this was not something I wanted to talk about. But I felt that I needed to bring it to your attention so that you can be aware, so that if you know someone who perhaps has expressed a desire to participate, at least you can tell them why they shouldn't. Yeah? At least you can share with them this podcast. If they're planning to go, maybe you don't say anything to them, but you share this podcast with them so they can hear the reasons why it's not a good idea, right? So in Cambodia, for instance, and Thailand, where large groups of people are left economically vulnerable and who have no other means of support, there are people from the larger cities who travel to these outer regions. And what they do is they go and tell the parents that they're taking the kids into the city to work as housekeepers and maids, and work in laundromats and work in restaurants as waiters, and so on. Nothing could be farther from the truth. That's the last time, more than likely, that child will ever see his or her parents again, right? They often take them to a brothel. They certainly aren't putting them to work. The work that they're giving them to do is sex, where a grown man, often a Westerner from either Europe or the United States, is introduced to them, and that's their first introduction to sex. Imagine an 8-year-old child's body being penetrated and being terrified and torn apart by some nefarious individual whose only sole intention is to gratify himself. Now, think about that. If this were your child here in America, what would you do? And this 8-year-old child is, she doesn't just have sex with one guy, she has to have sex with the other and the other. And the thing about this sex tourism that I don't understand is the opportunity for sexually transmitted disease is so widespread. And you wonder where a lot of these STDs are coming from, right? And the opportunity, because the girls themselves, they're rarely ever kept in habitations that are hygienically clean. I've read one story where they don't shower much because it's not like they're interested in their hygiene. They just want them prettied up for the next guy to do whatever the guy wants, so that the pimp, the person who controls the brothel, gets the money. And it's a ring of people. The little guy whom she interacts with, that's not the one you need to worry about. Is the guy on top of that, on top of that. This is Harriet Kamek. Join me in just a moment. We'll continue this broadcast.